Ever hit that massive mid-afternoon wall after a huge meal? Yeah, we've all been there. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are demystifying diabetes and unpacking the fascinating science behind blood sugar. We're going to strip away the complex medical jargon and look at exactly how our body manages the fuel we feed it, why that system sometimes fails, and how we can easily read the warning signs.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with a real-world salary and bank analogy, then look at the pancreas and its hormones, define what diabetes mellitus actually is, compare type 1 and type 2, break down how we test for blood sugar, and finally, go over recognizing the common symptoms. Let's get right into it.
Section 1, the salary and bank analogy. We're going to start by looking at how our bodies handle energy using something we all understand perfectly: money. To truly understand blood sugar, imagine you earn a monthly salary of, say, 10,000 rupees. You know you need about 9,000 to cover your daily expenses for the month, which is roughly 300 rupees a day. But you obviously don't just spend it all at once, you portion it out. And that extra 1,000? You deposit that straight into the bank for emergencies. Well, this brilliantly illustrates how the human body works. The food we eat, that's our salary. Once digested, carbohydrates turn into glucose, and that floods into our bloodstream to give us immediate everyday energy. But our body is smart. It knows we don't need all that energy right that second. So it takes the extra glucose, converts it into a stored form called glycogen, and deposits it into our biological banks, the liver, the muscles, and the brain. Moving to section 2, the pancreas and the hormones. So, if the body is constantly making these deposits and withdrawals, who exactly are our biological bankers? Our body relies on an organ tucked right behind the stomach, the pancreas, or agnaceae. If we zoom all the way into the tail of the pancreas, we find these tiny clusters of cells called the islets of Langerhans. Get this, these clusters make up only about 1 to 2% of the pancreas, but they literally run our entire energy economy. Inside these clusters, we've got alpha cells, beta cells, and delta cells. The beta cells produce insulin. Think of insulin as a deposit slip. It takes that extra glucose from the blood and stores it away as glycogen. The alpha cells, on the other hand, produce glucagon. When you are fasting, glucagon acts like a withdrawal slip, breaking that stored glycogen back down into glucose so you have energy. And the delta cells? They release somatostatin, which basically acts as the branch manager, keeping the alpha and beta cells perfectly balanced. So you can see how this creates this beautiful continuous cycle. You eat, your blood glucose goes up, and insulin steps in to store the extra. Then later, when you haven't eaten and your blood glucose drops, glucagon withdraws that stored energy. It's a perfectly balanced system. But what happens when that system breaks down? That brings us to section 3. What is diabetes mellitus? Let's take a look at what actually happens when we experience a biological banking failure. You know, when people say diabetes, we actually have to be pretty specific. We need to distinguish between diabetes insipidus, which is a condition characterized by extreme thirst and frequent urination, known as polydipsia and polyuria, and diabetes mellitus. Mellitus actually means honey sweet in Latin, referring to the excess sugar. This is the classic blood sugar disease we are looking at today. It happens when there is a fundamental malfunction with insulin. Without insulin doing its job, that extra glucose just doesn't get banked. It just piles up in the bloodstream, leading to highly elevated, dangerous blood sugar levels. Next up is section 4, type 1 versus type 2. So why exactly does the insulin fail? Well, it really depends. A crucial point to understand here is that diabetes mellitus isn't just one single condition. It essentially splits into two very distinct types with totally different biological causes. Type 1 diabetes is when the body produces virtually zero insulin. The beta cells are either completely absent from birth, or they've been wiped out by an autoimmune response, where the body's own immune system attacks the pancreas. Because there's no insulin at all, type 1 patients require daily, lifelong injections just to survive. On the other side, we have type 2 diabetes, which actually counts for about 90% of all cases. In type 2, the body does produce insulin, but the cells develop insulin resistance. They basically just stop responding to the hormone. Why? While family history does play a role, a massive driver of type 2 is a sedentary lifestyle. Eating highly processed, sugary foods late at night, avoiding exercise, carrying excess weight, all of this eventually exhausts the cell's ability to respond to insulin. Moving along to section 5, testing for blood sugar. Now we're going to dive into how we actually measure these levels in a clinical setting to see if our biological bankers are doing their job. Okay, so this table lays out the precise diagnostic thresholds. It's kind of like a biological report card. We generally look at two main tests here: fasting blood sugar, or FBS, taken after 8 hours of not eating, and postprandial, or PP, which is tested exactly 2 hours after a meal. If your fasting level is under 100 milligrams per deciliter and your postprandial is under 140, great, you are in the normal healthy range. But look closely at that middle curve. If your fasting sugar creeps up between 101 and 125, or your post-meal sugar sits between 141 and 199, you are classified as pre-diabetic. Cross that line, testing higher than 125 fasting or over 200 postprandial, and that becomes a clinical diabetic diagnosis. Now, those daily tests are super helpful, but they're really just brief snapshots of a single moment in time. To get the big picture, doctors use what's called the HbA1c test. Hemoglobin is the protein in our red blood cells that carries oxygen. When glucose builds up in the blood, it actually binds or glycates to this hemoglobin. And since red blood cells live for about 2 to 3 months, the HbA1c test looks at this glycated hemoglobin to reveal your true average blood sugar over that entire 60 to 90-day period. And these numbers right here, they represent the ultimate danger zone. A healthy person will score under 5.7% on an HbA1c test. But if your percentage lands between 5.7% and 6.4%, it is a massive warning sign. I mean, diabetes is literally knocking at the door. But it's also a crucial window of opportunity, because changing your lifestyle right here, improving your diet, getting active, can literally stop you from crossing that 6.4% line into full-blown diabetes. Section 6. Recognizing the common symptoms. Before we wrap up today, let's talk about the physical warning signs our bodies give us when this glucose banking system is in crisis. When your cells are locked out of their glucose bank accounts, the body really starts to struggle. Look out for things like constant fatigue. Your body is literally starved for funds. Because high blood sugar pulls fluid from your tissues, including the lenses of your eyes, you might experience vision issues. Persistent body and joint aches are also really common. Incredibly slow wound healing is another classic hallmark, because elevated sugar actually damages blood vessels and impairs blood flow. You might even notice swelling in your feet. And, particularly in type 1 diabetes, because the body can't access glucose at all, it'll just start burning fat and muscle for fuel. This causes sudden, drastic weight loss, even if you are eating normally. So we've seen how beautifully the body balances its energy budget when things go right, and exactly what happens when the system gets overwhelmed. Given how heavily our lifestyle impacts type 2 diabetes, you really have to ask yourself, are your daily habits building up healthy biological savings, or are they pushing you toward a dangerous energy crisis? The good news is, for a lot of people, the power to rewrite that financial future is right there on your plate and in your sneakers. Thanks for joining this explainer, and we'll see you next time.